Have you ever felt like you did everything right, showed up, listened, cared, and still watched her slowly pull away? That confusion isn't accidental. It's what happens when you're playing a game without knowing the rules. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear. Women rarely say what they actually want in a relationship. Not because they're deceptive, but because saying it out loud kills the very attraction they're responding to. The moment she has to explain it, it stops working. It makes her feel exposed, weak, turned off. So you keep guessing, overcorrecting, trying harder. And the harder you try, the worse it gets. There are 7 things women want you to do in a relationship, but will never tell you directly. Miss them, and you'll keep losing ground without knowing why. Because most men don't fail from lack of effort. They fail because they're playing the wrong role. This isn't romantic advice. And it's definitely not about flowers, gifts, or saying the right words at the right time. What you're about to hear are silent expectations, psychological pressure points that quietly shape attraction over time. Ignore them, and no amount of affection will save you. If you've ever felt unsure of where you stand, hit like. If you want to understand women at a level they'll never openly admit, subscribe. Now let's get clear on the first thing she expects, without ever asking for it. Number 1. She wants you to take the lead without asking. She will almost never say this out loud. Not because she doesn't want it, but because the moment she has to ask for leadership, it stops feeling like leadership. It turns into management. And management is not attractive. Here's what most men misunderstand. Taking the lead is not about control, dominance, or barking orders. It's about decisiveness, direction. The quiet confidence of a man who doesn't outsource every choice to her just to avoid making a mistake. When you constantly ask, "What do you want to do? When should we go? Is this okay with you?" You think you're being considerate. What you're actually doing is placing the mental load on her shoulders. You're asking her to guide the experience, approve your moves, and validate your decisions. Over time, that turns you into an emotional assistant instead of a romantic partner. Indecision is subtle, but it's corrosive. It tells her you don't trust yourself. And if you don't trust yourself, why should she? Leadership shows up in small, everyday moments. Choosing the restaurant without turning it into a committee meeting. Saying, "Be ready at 7," instead of hovering in uncertainty. Making plans and inviting her into them, rather than waiting for her to design the entire experience. This doesn't mean you ignore her preferences. It means you integrate them without needing her permission at every step. There's a difference between being considerate and being directionless. Here's the part men don't like to hear. The more a woman has to lead, the less she desires. Because desire requires polarity. And polarity disappears when she feels like she's the one steering the ship. When you lead calmly and consistently, something shifts. She relaxes. Her nervous system settles. She stops evaluating and starts responding. Not because you demanded it, but because you created an environment where she didn't have to be on all the time. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. The moment she has to lead you, she stops craving you. Number 2, she wants to feel chosen every single day. She will never walk up to you and say, "I need reassurance." Not because she doesn't need it, but because saying that out loud feels needy, exposed, and deeply unsexy. So instead, she watches. She observes patterns. She notices what you do when there's nothing to gain. Feeling chosen isn't about compliments. It's not about saying "I love you" on repeat or flooding her with validation. And it definitely isn't about grand gestures that only show up when you're trying to fix something. What she responds to lives in the small, almost invisible moments, the ones that don't ask for anything in return. It's the way your attention lands on her when no one's watching. The way you acknowledge her presence without being prompted. The quiet signals that say, out of all the options, I'm still choosing you. Most men get this wrong because they confuse effort with timing. They show up emotionally when they want affection, intimacy, or reassurance for themselves. And at first, she may accept it. But over time, she starts to feel the pattern. Your warmth becomes conditional. Your attention feels transactional. That's when something subtle shifts inside her. She doesn't leave. Not immediately. Instead, she starts questioning her place in your life. She becomes more aware of who notices her, who responds to her energy, who makes her feel seen without needing to be asked. This is where men panic later and say, it came out of nowhere. It didn't. When a woman feels chosen consistently, not loudly, not desperately, she relaxes. She softens. She invests more emotionally because she doesn't feel like she's competing for your focus. That sense of security doesn't make her bored. It makes her loyal. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. Women don't drift because they're immoral. They drift because they stop feeling selected, desired, prioritized in the quiet spaces between words. If you only choose her when it's convenient, when you're lonely, or when you want something, she will eventually choose herself or someone else without announcing it. Feeling chosen isn't something you say. It's something she feels. And when she stops feeling it, everything else starts to crack. Number 3. She wants mystery, even inside commitment. This is where a lot of men get uncomfortable, because they confuse mystery with secrecy, and secrecy with manipulation. That's not what this is about. Mystery isn't hiding, it isn't lying, and it isn't playing games. Mystery is about not collapsing your entire inner world into the relationship. When a man overshares everything, every thought, every emotion, every move, he thinks he's building intimacy. What he's often doing instead is removing curiosity. And curiosity is the engine of attraction. Women don't just want to love a man, they want to discover him. That sense of discovery doesn't disappear just because you're committed. In fact, it becomes even more important. When she feels like she already knows exactly what you'll say, exactly how you'll react, exactly what you'll do next, something inside her switches off. Not consciously, instinctively. Oversharing turns you predictable. Predictable turns you flat. And flat doesn't create desire. This doesn't mean being distant or emotionally unavailable. It means having a life, a depth, and a rhythm that doesn't require her constant access. Goals you're working on without needing applause. Interests you pursue without narrating every step. Parts of your inner world that are grounded enough not to need constant validation. Mystery lives in self-containment. When you don't explain yourself unnecessarily, when you don't rush to fill silence, when you let her wonder, not worry, about you. There's a critical difference between transparency and total exposure. Transparency builds trust. Total exposure erodes polarity. A man who has nothing reserved for himself slowly loses his edge because there's nothing left to explore. Here's what most men miss. Loyalty does not require full access to your inner world. Commitment does not mean forfeiting your autonomy. You can be present, honest, and emotionally available without turning yourself into an open book she's already finished reading. When a woman senses there's still more to you, more depth, more direction, more layers, her attraction stays awake. She leans in. She pays attention. She keeps engaging. The moment she feels like she's already seen everything, attraction doesn't explode. It fades quietly, and mystery is what keeps it alive. She will tell you she can handle herself. And in many ways, she can. She's capable, independent, and fully functional in the world. But here's what she won't say, and may not even consciously articulate. Her body is still wired to respond to a man who makes her feel safe without turning it into a show. Protection isn't about aggression. It's not about puffing your chest, picking fights, or announcing that you're the alpha. In fact, the louder the performance, the less effective it is. Real protection is quiet, observant, instinctive. It shows up in the way you position yourself without making it obvious. The way you notice shifts in her comfort before she has to say anything. The way you stay aware of the environment, not because you're paranoid, but because you're present. Switching sides on the sidewalk so she's farther from traffic. Reading the room when someone's energy changes. Stepping in smoothly when a situation starts to feel off, without embarrassing her, without escalating, without needing credit. That subtle awareness sends a powerful signal to her nervous system. You don't have to be on guard here. And when her body feels that, attraction deepens. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. Protection isn't only physical. Emotional protection matters just as much. It's knowing when to redirect a conversation that's touching a nerve, when to shut down disrespect without making her feel like a spectacle, when to back her up, not loudly, not defensively, but decisively. Here's what most men don't realize. When a woman doesn't feel protected, she doesn't necessarily panic. She starts calculating. She begins questioning whether you're someone she could rely on when things get uncomfortable, unpredictable, or hard. That doubt doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly in the background. And once safety erodes, attraction doesn't vanish overnight. It fades slowly. First trust, then openness, then desire. This is why overperformance fails. Protection that looks like insecurity, jealousy, or control actually does the opposite of what you intend. It raises her defenses instead of lowering them. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Attraction dies slowly when safety disappears. Not because she wants drama, but because her body no longer relaxes around you. When you protect without posturing, without noise, without needing applause, she feels it. She doesn't need to say thank you. Her behavior will tell you everything. Number 5. She wants you to have a life outside of her. She will never say this directly. In fact, early on, she may even encourage the opposite. She'll enjoy the attention, the availability, the feeling of being your priority. But over time, what once felt flattering starts to feel heavy, and then quietly unattractive. Here's why. A man who makes a woman the center of his universe slowly loses his own gravity. At first, always being available looks like devotion. You rearrange your schedule, you drop plans, you respond instantly. And for a while, it works. She feels desired, important, chosen. But attraction doesn't thrive on convenience, it thrives on value. And value is tied to direction. When your life shrinks to revolve around her, something subtle happens. Your purpose fades into the background. Your ambition softens. Your edge dulls. Without realizing it, you begin signaling that your time isn't scarce, and what isn't scarce isn't valued. Women are drawn to men who are moving towards something, men with momentum, men whose lives are already full, and who invite her into that fullness rather than orbiting around her. When you have goals, friendships, challenges, and passions that exist independently of the relationship, you project self-respect. You become someone she has to make space for, not someone who's always waiting. There's another truth men rarely confront. Making her your only source of happiness puts pressure on her. Immense pressure. She becomes responsible not just for the relationship, but for your emotional well-being. And that isn't romantic. It's exhausting. When she feels like your world collapses without her, attraction doesn't grow. It suffocates. Ironically, when you prioritize your purpose, she often wants more of your time, not less. Because now, your attention feels earned, meaningful, intentional. She feels like she's sharing you with something important, and that elevates her place in your life instead of cheapening it. Here's the truth most men resist. When you make her the center of your universe, you become too small to desire. Love her, be present, build memories, but never abandon the life that made you attractive to her in the first place. Number 6. She wants surprise without a reason. She will never tell you this directly, because the moment she has to ask for romance, it stops feeling romantic. It turns into obligation, and obligation doesn't spark desire, it kills it. Most men think surprise means money, big gestures, holidays circled on a calendar. But that's not what she's responding to. What keeps emotional chemistry alive is spontaneity. The feeling that you thought of her without being prompted, without a deadline, without a reason. Surprise is powerful because it breaks predictability. And predictability, over time, is one of the quietest killers of attraction. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It's the small, unplanned moments that land the hardest. Picking up something she mentioned weeks ago and handing it to her casually. Sending her a song that reminded you of her with no explanation. Saying, "Get ready, we're going somewhere," without turning it into a discussion or a negotiation. The impact isn't about the act itself. It's about what the act signals: attention, awareness, intent. It tells her you're tuned in, not just when the relationship calendar tells you to be. When effort only shows up on birthdays, anniversaries, or after an argument, your affection starts to feel scheduled, mechanical, predictable. She stops feeling chosen and starts feeling managed. Spontaneous surprises reset emotional momentum. They remind her that there's still movement, still curiosity, still life inside the connection. They interrupt routine and replace it with anticipation. And anticipation is where excitement lives. Here's the part men often miss. Surprise doesn't require excess. It requires presence. You can't surprise a woman if you're not paying attention, if you don't listen, if you don't notice patterns, preferences, moods, and moments. When you act without a reason, without a calendar reminder, without expecting anything back, her emotional guard drops. She starts wondering what you'll do next. And that wondering keeps her engaged, even when you're not around. Romance on a schedule feels safe. Romance without a reason feels alive. Number 7. She wants playful challenge, not compliance. This is where many men lose themselves without realizing it. They start believing that being agreeable is the same as being kind. That if they just go along with everything, every opinion, every preference, every mood, they'll keep the peace and secure the relationship. What they actually secure is predictability. When you never challenge her, never tease her perspective, never hold your own ground, you don't come across as supportive. You come across as safe in the dullest possible way. And dull is not where attraction lives. Playful challenge isn't conflict. It isn't arguing for the sake of winning. And it definitely isn't putting her down. It's the light tension that comes from a man who isn't afraid to be himself, even when that means not agreeing. It shows up in a raised eyebrow instead of instant approval, a confident smile instead of immediate compliance, a calm, grounded response that says, "I hear you, but I don't automatically fold." That subtle resistance creates polarity. It tells her you have a spine, that your opinions exist independently of her reactions. And paradoxically, that makes her lean in, not pull away. Here's the psychological truth most men overlook. People invest where there is movement, where there's a back and forth, where energy isn't flat. When a woman feels like she has to engage, persuade, or play a little to win you over emotionally, she becomes more invested in the dynamic. Compliance removes that tension. It turns interaction into routine. And routine, over time, drains desire. Playful challenge keeps things alive because it signals confidence without hostility. You're not trying to dominate the exchange. You're simply not disappearing inside it. You can disagree and still make her laugh. Hold your ground without escalating. Stay relaxed while staying firm. This is the energy she responds to long term. Not the man who never pushes back, but the man who isn't afraid to. Here's the final truth bomb of this list. She doesn't want a man who always nods along. She wants a man who's comfortable standing where he is, without needing permission. And when she feels that presence, attraction doesn't have to be chased. It stays. If you've been listening closely, you've probably noticed something uncomfortable, but important. None of these 7 things are tactics. They're not tricks. They're not moves you perform to keep a woman interested. They're about who you are, being in the relationship. Most men keep asking the wrong question. What does she want from me? That question keeps you reactive, guessing, adjusting, performing. The men who hold attraction long-term don't live there. They understand that attraction responds to presence, not effort, to direction, not accommodation, to a man who is grounded enough to lead, self-contained enough to remain interesting, and strong enough not to disappear just to keep the peace. When you stop trying to manage her feelings and start managing your own center, something shifts. You're no longer chasing clarity, you're creating it. And when a woman feels that stability, calm, decisive, unapologetic, she doesn't need convincing. Her behavior adjusts on its own. This is the part most men miss. You don't keep a woman by holding on tighter. You keep her by becoming someone she responds to naturally. When you lead without asking,